Welcome to A Moment of Bach, Season 5. This is our first episode in our new season. We're excited to be starting our 5th year. Yeah, Christian, did you think we were going to be doing this for 5 years when you had the idea when you first came to me for the podcast? Well, not really. Like we said at the very beginning, I knew that we would never run out of material. Yeah. So, but I didn't also really think about that we'd still be going after 4 years. But of course we're not going to run out of material. No. And sometimes when I think Bach has exhausted all his harmonic possibilities with the things that we've listened to so far for the podcast, then I'm proven wrong by something like this one. The Great Fantasia and Fugue in G minor, BWV 542, as performed by Leo van Doeselaar of the Netherlands Bach Society, is our example for today. And our moment comes from the Fantasia. Do we say what the podcast was yet? No. This is A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from Bach's vast musical output, just a minute's worth or even a few seconds, and show you why we think those moments are remarkable. We are your podcast hosts, Christian and Alex Giebert, and here is today's moment from the Fantasia of the Great Fantasia and Fugue in G minor. Christian, I remember we listened to a piece, this was maybe, 20 years ago, and we were just finding sort of random composers to listen to. I think it was like a piece by Healy Willen. Was it Healy Willen? I don't remember who. But it was an organ piece, and you made the comment of, I'm not sure that 12-tone equal temperament is always a good thing for these composers. Like, for the range of dissonances that composers can access if they're not careful with how they use them, That piece particularly was mostly all dissonant with hardly any real resolution. That music was just chaotic. But then here in Bach, sometimes we have a lot of chaos. I want to focus on two aspects today. One is psychological and the other is music theory technical. Well, let's start with technical. What is chromaticism? What is this sort of dissonance that Bach is really employing a lot in this piece? Let's listen to the very beginning of it. Just the first 3 chords, we get a sense of where Bach is going to go with the chaos of this piece. At the beginning, it's G minor. The right hand is doing all these ornamentations, but the left hand and pedal are just providing us with these chords. The first chord is G minor. The second chord is, I guess you could call it a dominant function. It's kind of like a D chord, but it's also kind of a diminished chord on F sharp. And also the G is still on the bottom in the pedal, so we already have some real crunchy tension here. F sharp, fully diminished 7th. Yeah. But feeling dominant-ish because of that stuff in the right hand. Kind of feels like a D7 chord. But then the third chord, that's where it gets a little crazy. We have a B diminished chord here. So what is that leading to? Well, let's just follow it to the 4th chord. It's a C minor chord, and that is where you expect B diminished chords to go. So even just looking at these first 4 chords, even though they sound so crunchy, Bach is actually totally following rules here. These diminished chords go where they are supposed to go, so to speak. So then how do composers find their way into creating unique pieces of art if these rules are so hard and fast? And the answer is that they're not actually hard and fast. It just seems that way when we look back at it. I mean, sure, they had some treatises, which were sort of rule books in a way, but those really were explaining after the fact in a way that's more like research. Yes. Just like any style, the reason why artists use a style is, 1, their own expression, and 2, of course, it's an amalgamation of all the influences that artist has had. And that's exactly why styles shifted so greatly especially the latter half of the 20th century, when the world was so much more connected and styles were able to be basically globally consumed. But here, what we have is something that sounds, to me, Christian, what do you think? I think Bach was really going for a Pachelbel-like Fantasia here. This is typical. These Fantasias are pretty typical of like the previous generation of German organ composers.
Mm-hmm.
They're
definitely
very florid.
Yeah, more adventurous harmonically and melodically probably than Pachelbel, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely a product of its time. Fantasia, by the way, is a pretty loose musical term, but it often suggests something that sounds like an improvisation, which this definitely does.
Yeah. So some of my favorite stuff in this Fantasia, because it's so loose, he's able to sort of land on unusual cadences and land on unusual inversions, as well as going through the chromatic twists and turns of what's happening. So here we see Bach starting to settle into like a tempo, whereas before it was all just free. We get some imitative stuff in the hands. You can hear some repeated themes. It's actually very clear. For Bach, that's actually kind of unusual to just do straight imitation at the octave. But he's doing that there. And harmonically, it's not quite as adventurous yet, even though it's still crunchy. So but then we get to some of my favorite material, which are these little cadence things in which he will land on a big dissonance on a downbeat and then resolve it. One, and on the and it resolves. But I don't know if I'd really call that much of a resolution. It's still kind of a strange place that he lands. So right there, he goes into the free thing again, and then our organist, von Doeselaar, has chosen to go back to the bigger sound here, which is a great choice.
Yeah, great choice. Is that an organ joke?
Yeah. He's probably using the great division of the organ there. And and then big chord. And then we have not a really resolution, because that's just a kind of odd B minor chord that it resolves to in first inversion. It's just basically not stable. Now let's hear another little ornament thing up there, and let's see where he lands after that. Okay, so that was unexpected. That's the same type of chord, but it's a C minor chord now. It's in first inversion. Going from B minor to C minor like that, that's weird, man.
It's really
weird. That's really weird.
They're not related remotely.
No. And you can know this if you know the circle of fifths. You can know that even though B and C look really close together on a keyboard, they're not close together in terms of key relations. So functionally, it does not follow rules.
But he gets away with it by doing these little ornaments between, and then ending on a single note that would work in the chord before this new key.
Yes, and romantic composers get credit for like activating fully diminished chords to get key changes done, but really Bach was already doing that, right? And even the composers before him, like right here, where we just talked about a B minor and then a little transition in and then a C minor. The way he does the transition is out of the B minor, he creates a B diminished. Then he's going up to the A flat, so now he's outlined a B diminished chord in this little ornament. The A flat holds over, and then, boom, C minor. Now that A flat can just like resolve down to G to be part of C minor. So you can go anywhere with diminished chords, because diminished chords are created out of just stacking minor thirds, and they can be functional in 4 different keys because there's 4 notes in the chord. And then you can go to any of those keys.
Yeah, they're symmetrical.
Yeah.
So they are the same. It's how you divide 12 notes equally as an octave, 12 half steps. into 4.
Yes.
They're 3 half steps apart. In music, whenever something is dividing the octave in a very equal way, the actual sound is very dissonant. It's counterintuitive.
Yep.
The halfway point of the octave is a dissonant augmented fourth or diminished fifth, which we sometimes call tritone. And you would think that a simple division of something would result in something more naturally pure, but it's the other way around. When you break the octave into half or thirds or fourths or even sixths, you get the strangest of the sounds put together. It's almost like splitting the atom. It doesn't want to be broken that way. And on the other hand, natural sounds come from instead intervals like the perfect fifth and the major third and things like that.
Right.
So if you divide into just 4 equal notes, then there'd be no way for the listener to know where it was going to go next except for prior context. And you could actually just do a fake out and go to one of the other places. And that's what he's doing in these cases.
It is. And it's not something you would ever be able to do in ancient music from before this time, because these divisions, as you mentioned, of the 12 equal tones did not exist in that way. The tuning was not built for that on instruments. And even though there were some eras of Western vocal music from like the Middle Ages where they got pretty complicated, we didn't have anything like this. This is pushing boundaries of music here. And to your point about, Christian, about those perfect fourths and fifths being the more consonant sounds, that has to do with like pure divisions of like a string, for example, dividing the string into equal ratios. So these are not, the reason why these sound bad is that they're not really pure.
Yeah.
Like you said they're equal divisions of, but that's because the 12-tone system is already sort of this compromise of tuning where the way you make everything equal is by kind of like altering the perfect fifths and fourths and things like that and the major thirds a little bit so that everything is just equal, so that all the half steps are equal. And, if a lot of that technical stuff is not your area of expertise, I think it's probably just clear to let the music speak for itself when it lands on these very dissonant chords. Music is always metaphor, right? This is the subjective side of music. We make it objective by talking about music theory, but it's subjective what that sound is going to do for you. I think most people would agree that these big, scary, diminished chords played on a church organ with a pretty full organ sound is not like a happy, peaceful feeling, right? That's pretty obvious to a Western context listener. But that being said, there's different kinds of dissonance and how it makes you feel and the metaphor that it might strike in you, even just subliminally. So for instance, this one, which we played earlier, the way that it just cuts off after that, that might invoke feelings of loneliness or anxiousness about being alone, or like maybe you're just scared of the dark or something like that. Whereas then this section, which I think is my very favorite part and is my moment, is Bach simply stepping up slowly, all chromatic notes in the higher parts in the hands. And then in the pedal parts, it's actually going down by eighth note steps. So listen to those low notes go down while the high notes creep up in chromatic steps. That is still Bach using chromaticism, but this one is a little different because there's like this propulsion to it. It's moving, inexorably moving. For that one, it feels more dreadful or like doom or like a steady march towards something bad, right? And then when he does land, it is on a diminished chord. And he does not allow it to resolve for quite a while. This is a long piece, Fantasia and Fugue, the great Fantasia and Fugue, great meaning big, right?
And it's long, and the Fantasia is about 6 minutes, and the Fugue is about 6 minutes. And as we wind our way down to the end of this Fantasia section, we get a couple more of these downbeat dissonances that go into a diminished chord instead of resolving. And that diminished chord, man, it's just like Bach was just really having an angsty day when he wrote this. This is the most, as I said in the very intro, this is the most chromatically dense piece of Bach music that we've looked at on the podcast, and we've looked at a lot, and Bach does it a lot. But I think just quantity-wise, there's so much density of dissonance here. So then, dissonance and consonance, right? Or you could say tension and resolution. In music is typically a metaphor for discord and then peace, right? I think tension and resolution in music is a metaphor for tension and resolution in life. I think when you hear it, it reminds you of times when you felt stressed about something but then felt relaxed after something resolved. If in your life you had a 2-week span of something where you were stressed about something for a long time and then it was over and then you felt great after, that 2-second bit of music with a dissonance and then a resolution is a compressed version of that, and it reminds your brain of that, and you go, oh yeah, I remember what it's like to feel the release of tension after that stressful event. I think the brain does that. The brain finds patterns. So music is very meaningful to each person because of this. Besides all the other reasons that music can be meaningful, that's one big one. Yes, I agree. I think that there's something with the idea of Fantasia in general, but especially this one, the improvisation nature of it, where you're like, you, the performer, and in this case, Bach, who's making this up on the organ, is working through it. There's an element of like getting through it, getting through all the gritty stuff, and then you get to do a much more orderly fugue, almost like as a reward after. And it's thought that Bach improvised this at the organ for a audition, or just to basically to show off his skills to another organist of a high post. So part of it is it's just trying to be impressive. That's one way to read it. But I think that you're right, Alex, that it's like too filled with angst to just be showy. Just like most of Bach's works, it doesn't come off as showy primarily. I don't think that's its primary effect. Yes, I agree. And Bach, even in his showiest works, which are usually the keyboard works, even those are filled with pathos. Like, this just is how he is as a composer. Even when they're not a sacred text, you can just imagine the "O Sacred Head Now Wounded" type feel, the Lent or Holy Week type feel of this. You can imagine the pain and the tension and the stumbling and the torture that Christ went through could be part of absolutely what's being portrayed here. Yeah, I mean, his vocal music that literally has those themes in it, that rhetorically has those literal themes in it, is much like this. Yeah. So yeah, maybe. Yeah, and it's just having a piece that's mostly all tension with hardly any release is so affecting to listen to. And then the final resolution, of course, it makes it all the more striking when it happens. At the end of the Fantasia, we finally get one more chromatic sound that is a pedal motion going up to the G. And then finally, a 5-1 chord, or a dominant to tonic chord. And that is our first real resolution in this whole thing. And it is glorious. And one of the manuscript copies, I don't think the original was found, but one of the manuscript copies does not have the B natural at the end. That is interesting. And it also speaks to something that the organist here says the organist Van Doeselaar says in the companion video, where he talks about the G major being so just beautifully sonorous on the instrument specifically, that is the Baroque tuning that would have been used in the day. It's still a equal temperament basically, but it's a little different than the equal temperament of today, and the technicalities of those differences are out of the scope of something you can talk about early on a podcast without like talking to an expert in tuning. But if you listen to that chord, it sounds so, so nice. And it's because of that specific type of tuning. And this is why I think Bach probably would have actually had this as a major chord, even though you say that manuscript doesn't have it. And it's also just like a thing you could add almost as an ornamentation into the Baroque era. You could just change the last note to be a major chord if it was a minor key, which is called a Picardy third, and is something that composers would sometimes write in and sometimes not. Sometimes you just kind of just do it.
Yeah, it's totally justified, and Van Doeselaar even remarks that it makes the fugue more powerful because the B flat note is a little less in tune on that organ he uses, which speaks to our whole thing about tuning, which is that the Baroque period, yes, they had access to all 12 keys, and Bach could go to crazy distant places harmonically, but it's actually even more harmonically distant on that organ than it is on a piano or a completely equally tempered organ of today, like the one we might find in most church buildings. Because these older organs, some of them still have their original setup, so G major sounds really clear and open. Those sounds that are clearer and more justly intoned are purer, like physically, acoustically. And so
they resonate. They literally resonate more.
Yeah, the B flat's less resonant against the G than the B natural is. And all of the other weird chords that Bach gets to are even more angsty and biting because of that.
Right. Yeah, we kind of buried the lead. We haven't even talked about that. A major chord is the most sonorous simply because of the natural quality of the tone. When you have a low tone, its natural overtones already are just basically a major chord. That's an oversimplification, but it gets the job done, right? But then minor chords are like a bastardization of that, and is why they sound wrong, sort of. I mean, they don't sound nice at like a major chord does. It's like literally why minor sounds minor and major sounds major, and why people associate different moods between the two.
Yeah, a major triad with 3 notes in it comes up really fast in the harmonic series of natural divisions of a tone. Like by the time you divided the tone just into 5, you've already got all 3 parts of the major scale. The minor comes way, way farther up, like way up there.
And listen to this last chord again, this G major chord. First of all, the left hand, he's added a 16-foot rank on there, at least one 16-foot rank on there, so it's already sounding lower, plus at the regular pitch. And then of course in the pedal there's such low sounds with that low G. But what that 16-foot in the left hand does is it really brings out those G's and D's that are in the left hand, and you have this super strong 5th sound of G and D. The D is so loud that it's almost louder than the G's. And then on the very top you have a G, which is as to be expected. It's a perfect authentic cadence, we call that. And there's only one B natural, even though there's 3 G's and 3 D's. It's only one B, that way this chord is voiced.
Yeah.
But the B is still very clear because of what we were talking about before, the harmonic series. Even if you didn't play the B at all, your brain almost fills it in.
Yeah, you barely need it.
Because of the harmonics that are coming from the low G. So it's such a well-voiced chord, besides all the other complexity that came before it. Now that once you come out of all that chromatic dissonance and finally land there, it is stunning how satisfying that final chord is. It's maybe the most satisfying major chord at the end of a piece by Bach because of what came before. And isn't that just right? That's how it should be. For me, that feels like taking a vacation after like 3 weeks of really hard work, you know?
And now, that moment from the Fantasia of the great Fantasia and Fugue, BWV 542.
So, in a future episode, we will definitely talk about the fugue, the Great Fugue as it's called. We'll save that because it deserves its own episode. If this introduction to a musical moment inspired you to hear the rest of the Fantasia and Fugue as performed by Van Doeselaar of the Netherlands Bach Society, please check out the link in our episode description. Thank you for your listenership. We're excited to be back for the 5th season. Please tell a friend about us and get us on your podcast app. Okay, Christian, what's up for episode 2 of season 5? Well, I don't expect anybody to really notice this, but there has been a pattern where the first episode I pick in every season, which is usually, I think, the second episode of the season, is from my favorite, or one of my top 3, I guess, favorite cantatas, which is number 61, Nun kommt der Heiden Heiland. And over the past 4 years, we've looked at 4 different parts of that cantata. The cantata has 6 parts, so we only have 2 left to go. And this time, we are looking at soprano aria, Öffne dich, mein Herzens Ganze. Until next time, enjoy those moments.